start that. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for coming. I'm really excited to do this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Rodone. I'm a planner associate at the Next Level Planning Group. I've been in this industry for 4 years. I'm a certified financial planner practitioner. And I'm really excited to do this webinar for all of you. So this is the first in a series that we're doing. You might have seen the link you got that we'll also have another webinar next week. That's kind of the second part to this. And then throughout the year, we're going to be doing different webinars geared towards people younger than us. We have one for college students and high school students, and then all the way down to first grade, I believe. All right, so getting started. What we're going to focus today is on setting goals and making a plan. We'll talk about budgeting. We'll get into debt management and savings. And then next week, we're going to talk about investing, retirement planning, and insurance. What I usually ask of people during these meetings is to take notes and save any questions for the end or even after. This presentation is scheduled to go for about an hour, so I usually don't stop during the presentation for questions, but I will have time at the end. And then be present, stay engaged. I'll throughout this webinar be asking questions for you to reflect on and think about. I usually find it really helpful to have, a pen and a piece of paper to reflect and take some notes. All right, so with that, let's begin. Starting with setting goals and making a plan. The first step that I think is important when beginning to set goals for money is to first evaluate your relationship. So I usually think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your relationship with money? So take a second and check in with yourself. And think about where you would have been a year ago. Is it better or worse now? Are you coasting along with your relationship? And where do you want to be a year from now? But take a moment and particularly take note of any feelings that come up when you think about your relationship with money. Now, think about what specific areas you're still struggling with. It might be debt or having emergency savings. You might be overspending or you don't really have a budget. Maybe you don't understand how investing works or even where to start. You might also not know where to get started with insurance or not have any estate documents. Sometimes you also might feel guilt or be functioning in a scarcity mindset where it feels like there's never enough money. The biggest thing to think about in this category is abundance, so gratitude. A lot of times, that's not something we associate when we think about setting a budget for ourselves or having enough money. But evaluating your relationship with money can help guide you on what to focus on. After we've taken time to think about what areas we're struggling with, it's time to start focusing on what your goals are. And it's really important for your goals to write them down and be specific. So, whether that's saving for retirement or for college, what is the goal and how long until you get there? And once you've written them down and you're specific with what they are and you know when you want them, Think about when you're going to review them. Like, how often are you going to check in and see your progress? And where are you going to keep them? So some people find it really helpful to write it on a Post-it note that they stick to their computer or a mirror where they know they're going to see it every day and think about it every day. And then make sure you have a system to track your goals so that you can see that you're making progress. And I think it's also important to realize these don't have to be big goals like retirement or college, but maybe you have some credit card debts that you want to get out of, or you just want to take a meaningful vacation or even just a weekend away, but it could also be buying an iPad or a new car. Maybe it's for purchasing your first home by a certain year. Whatever your goal is, write it down and specify when you want it done. Next, think about tracking your numbers. So this one can feel big and kind of arduous, but the first place to start is looking at your bank account balances. So your cash and maybe some investment accounts, and then any debt you have. So that could be your credit card debt, student loans, maybe an auto loan. And then knowing the interest rates on all of these is really important. After that, maybe a 401k balance and other investments. And after you know all of these, how much is going in and how much is going out is really important. And if this does seem really overwhelming to you, I mean, for some people, you might be thinking, oh, I already know this. I already tracked this. Some of you might be like, well, I have no idea. And the thought of trying to gather all this information is really overwhelming. Probably some of you are in between. If you fall into one of the in between or this is really difficult categories, I'm happy to have a conversation with you to help you get the ball rolling. Okay, so after you have all those numbers, you have to think about your plan. You know, you have a purpose, but now you have to plan it out. Just stating you have a purpose isn't enough. You really have to actually sit down and see if your goals are realistic and then think about how to accomplish them. Building wealth is the result of a simple equation. You take your take-home income and you subtract your spending, and that gives you your gap money. And this gap is where wealth is created. And I find it really helpful to figure out that number on an annual and a monthly basis. Now, what if there is no gap? Or what if the gap is not big enough for you to accomplish your goals? I truly believe that no matter what number you get at the end of this equation, facing it head on, even if you don't know how to solve this piece of the puzzle, is really important. And it's so much more impactful to go into things with eyes wide open instead of burying your head in the sand. It's not going to get better if you don't make changes now. And if you've been ignoring this equation, you're not alone. Money is an emotional subject, and for many people is tied to some degree of fear, anxiety, stress or confusion, or maybe even embarrassment. These aren't fun emotions to deal with. And for most people, it feels easier to ignore than to face. But here's what I've learned about goal setting. When you make up your mind to do something, you start thinking differently and you think of ways to achieve it. Your behavior changes and your emotions change and people change. You can rewrite this story about money. Now, going back to this equation, it's pretty simple. There's only two variables here. So if you want to increase your gap, either you have to earn more or you have to spend less. And that brings us to budgeting. The first step to budgeting and creating a budget is figuring out how to track your expenses. There are a few different ways you can do this. So there are some online tools like Mint. This is the one that I personally use, but some people really enjoy using Excel, and there are plenty of templates online if you like Excel to create a budget. You don't have to do it from scratch. And then some people really just like using a pen and paper. None of these are necessarily better or worse than the other. They're just different, and the best one for you to use is the one that you will stick to and come back to often. Once you've picked your tool, these are the rules to go by. So there are 3 rules. The first thing to do is to categorize your spending. So if you're using Mint, you're likely able to just link your credit cards or your debit account, and Mint does a pretty good job of categorizing expenses for you, but it's not perfect, so you'll want to go in and double check. With Excel, you'll have to do it manually, and same with the notebook. But it's really important to be clear about what's a need versus a want versus savings. After that, you want to look at this monthly, and I really think that's at the very least monthly. I've had points in my life where there's been a lot of weddings, and I found the need to do this weekly to make sure that I was staying on track of my money, but at least monthly is important. And then share it with someone. So this is something I sit down and do with my sister. Like, it could be a significant other, it could be a spouse, it could be your friend. Sometimes when I spent a lot of money, it's me yelling about it to my dog, but whatever's going to work for you. And I found like having someone that I'm accountable to outside of myself is really helpful for keeping me on track. All right, so the next part I want to mention is that a lot of people don't like the term budgeting. It feels really constrictive, that word. I know that I've really felt that before. But I really like to think about budgeting as just deciding where your money gets to go. You know, you work really hard for your money, and you deserve to spend your money intentionally. I know, so I think about this a lot as when you open up social media. Like, for me personally, it's been TikTok for like a year now that I'll open it and I'll start scrolling, and before I know it, an hour has gone by. And if I had thought about what I wanted to do for the next hour of my life when I first opened TikTok, it probably would not have been to scroll through that for an hour. But that's also how we spend our money. It's just kind of automatic without thinking about it. And we don't realize how much we're spending until so much has gone. So I have like a rule of thumb that I'm going to share with you. And this isn't perfect for everyone, but if you're just starting, this rule can be really helpful for you to use as a framework for how to decide where and when to spend your money. This is called the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. So 50% of your money should go to needs, like groceries, housing, utilities, etc. That's where half of your income goes. And then another 30% goes to wants, so shopping, going out to eat, hobbies. I would include travel in this area as well. And then that final 20% goes to savings. And you might be thinking to yourself that you are currently in a situation where just your fixed expenses are more than 50% of your income. And that's like is a difficult place to be in, and you're certainly not alone. Getting to this budgeting rule will require some habit changes for you, or doing things that are countercultural. I mean, we live in a really big overconsumption society, so cutting back or moving at the end of your lease to an apartment that's less nice, it's not something most people are willing or going to do. And it might even feel like you're regressing or taking a step back. But but if you're in this situation, it's one of the most important things you can do to help move your life forward. Having like the most at retirement or reaching whatever your financial goal often means doing things that others aren't willing to do. All right, so you might also be looking at this and thinking some of the fixed expenses you have that are pushing you out of this 50% side is debt. And so we're going to talk about what to do about that and how to handle it. So right now, nearly half of all US adults, it's like 120 million people, have credit card debt. So that means they're carrying a balance every month on a credit card. And on average, US households are going to pay interest charges of over $1,100 this year. If you are right now under credit card debt that you can't seem to get out of, just take a second and think about what life will be like when it's gone. The first thing to do to get out of credit card debt is to stop using your credit cards. That is the first thing you have to do. I hear from a lot of people that they want to use their card because they get points. But if you are $4,000 in debt because you're not paying it off monthly, the credit card company is winning. The points are not helping you. They are not giving you $640 a year worth of points. Points only work if you pay your card off every month. And that's great if you can, but not everyone can manage it. Habit changes require commitment. I have truly found that if you have a hard time not using your card, canceling it or literally snipping it with a credit card like this lady here might be the most effective way to get yourself to stop using it. If you do go ahead and close your card, it's important to note that your credit will take a hit in that instance. That's just how the credit agencies report it. So it might be easier just to cut the card, but you have to stop using it to pay for things if you want to get out of debt. The next step is to build an emergency savings account of at least $1,000. This is really important so that when there is an emergency, you're not tempted to grab your credit card. And it's really important to do this as fast as possible. Maybe it's selling something or picking up a second job. I know that doesn't sound like fun. I have a second side hustle that I do on the weekends, and it's extra work, but at least getting to this $1,000 number is really important so that you don't have to keep using your card every time an emergency expense comes up. The third step is to cut your interest rate. So there's a few different ways you can try to do this. The first one is called balance transfers. And if you Google balance transfers in NerdWallet, I'm happy to send this link out as well after this meeting. You'll get to a page where there's a lot of introductory credit cards that offer 0% interest rate for usually anywhere between 9 and 18 months. And as long as your credit card is at a different institution than the new card, you could transfer your balance and have a 0% interest rate on your card for that period. So this will save you on the interest cost and help you to pay it off a lot faster. You do usually have to have a minimum credit score of like 650 to 680 for this to work. So if you are at that point, then this is a really great option for you. But if not, you could consider getting a personal loan. So these interest rates aren't necessarily super low. I've seen them between like 5 to 10%, but that is a lot less than 20% or 25% or 30% like some credit cards have. And you could contact a credit union, the bank that you currently have, or I have found that going to a local bank, so like if you're in Chicago, like TCF or something, you'll have more success than going to like Chase. The last step is to call your credit card company to negotiate a lower rate. If these first two options don't work for you, if you call your credit card company and let them know that you're struggling or need help, sometimes they'll work with you. I mean, they'll definitely work with you to create a payment plan, like they want their money back. So if you are struggling making that payment, it is worth calling your credit card company. And just to really hone this in, how important it is to cut your interest rate if possible. Starting here on the left, if you have this original balance of $6,000 and your interest rate is 20%, you're going to pay extra $1,800 in interest, and it's going to take you 33 months to pay it off. A personal loan at 10%, your interest rate or the amount of interest you pay is less than half, and you pay it off 4 months faster. And then if you're able to get 0%, and there's no extra interest payment, and it's gone in 18 months. So it can be really, really impactful to change your interest rate. And so it's definitely worth the time and the effort to look into it and do it if you're able. The fourth step is to select a payoff strategy. So there are two that we're going to look at. The first is called a debt snowball. So this is for if you have multiple different credit cards or multiple different loans with different interest rates. You're going to make minimum payments on all of your loans except for the one with the smallest balance. Once you've paid off that loan, you're gonna pay as much as you can on the next one with the smallest balance. And this strategy is really great for people who need immediate results to stay motivated, because you're gonna see results a lot faster. You're gonna pay off loans faster when you start by paying as much as you can on debt with the smallest balance. The second option is called the debt avalanche. So you make minimum payments and everything except for your loan with the highest interest rate. And you pay as much as you can on that loan, and then you repeat with the next highest. This one is the fastest and the most efficient. You're going to save the most money this way, but it can also take a lot longer to see results or feel like that you're making progress. So the best option of these two methods is the one that you're going to stick to. But it's really important that you pick one of these and don't just pay extra on every loan you have. That's number one rule. Don't do that. Pick one of these two strategies and go with that. All right, now that we've talked about different methods to pay off debt, you might be thinking, well, I have some debt, but I also want to save money for those goals that we just talked about in the beginning. So how do you know whether to pay off your debt or save? And for this, I'm talking about your extra gap money that we discussed earlier. Obviously, make sure you make your minimum payments on all of your debt. Don't default. But this extra gap money, should you put it towards getting rid of your debt or saving? This really is dependent on the interest rate you have. If you have an interest rate of 10% or more, pay that off as fast as possible. Put all of your extra gap money to paying off that debt, because that's really high interest and it's larger than the return you'll likely get in the market. Or I shouldn't say likely get, but it's higher than what I would expect a long-term rate of return to be by just investing in a diversified marketplace. If your interest is between 5 and 10%, then put half of your extra gap money towards your debt and half to your savings. And then if your debt's between 0 to 5%, pay the minimums and save and invest the rest. And I know this just says save here, but really important too, after you've got your emergency fund, the extra money you have that you're saving, invest it towards a specific goal. All right, so now thinking about saving and investing, and why, again, after you reach your emergency fund, it's really important to invest the extra money that you're saving for the long term and not just let it accumulate cash. All right, so this guy here, for those of you who don't recognize him, is Warren Buffett. He's been at least moderately successful at investing, at least. But he's famous for saying someone's sitting in the shade today because they planted a tree a long time ago. He also talks about this idea of a $500 haircut. In some articles, he talks about a $300,000 haircut. And He goes through this story to change the way you think about money and to think about the trade-offs you make. If you spend $1 today, then that dollar is not going to be invested or earn compounded interest. So let's look at $50 today. If you assume that you can get 7% annual returns, then you'll have $100 in 10 years and $533 in 35 years. And this is just $50 once today. Most people don't think about the trade-offs in their everyday life. Let's look at how this would be over 30 years. All right, and we're gonna again assume that you're getting a long-term rate of return of 7%. So after 30 years, if you save $50 a month, you will have saved $18,000, but you would have 60. So that's 18,000 of your own money and $42,000 that it's earned, that you got while you were sleeping. Now let's look at it for $500 a month over 30 years. All right, so then you save, this is about 180,000, but you'll have like just over 600,000. That's $430,000 more. But think about what this would be like if you waited 10 years from now to start saving, or 20 years, or what's the best time to start investing is when you have the money available. And it doesn't have to be this $500 a month. $50 a month is just fine. It's still compounded interest, and it's still benefiting you in the future. I hear a lot of people who say, well, I'm not saving yet because I can't save a meaningful amount. I promise you $50 a month is a meaningful amount. $20 a month is a meaningful amount. As soon as you are able, the best time to start is the best time to start investing. Now you're like, okay, I get it. I should invest, but how do you actually do that? How do you actually put money in the stock market? How do you actually invest it? So you first have to start thinking about recognizing the trade-offs. And again, just start small and build on it. You can open investment accounts online at Fidelity or Betterment, and we'll get a little bit more into the mechanics of it next week. But setting up automatic contributions are really important so that you don't have to think about it. And then again, invest the money. Don't just accumulate cash. All right. So now, okay, we know to save. Where do you put it? The first place, like we said earlier, is to that high interest debt. Get rid of that as soon as possible. After that, if you have a 401k available to you, invest in that at least up to the employer match. Okay, that is free money that your employer is giving you. And one way you can think about it is if your employer matches up to 3%, that is like you putting in $1 and immediately getting 100% return on it. So if you have a 401k available to you, at least put enough to the employer match. After that, you want to build up that emergency savings. We talked briefly earlier about making sure it's at least $1,000. And then after you're hitting this match and you have extra money, it makes sense to have about 3 to 6 months of expenses. And for those of you who are wondering why it's a range, it's really to your comfort level. At our firm, we call it your SWAN number, or your sleep well at night number. How much money do you need to have liquid in cash that you're able to sleep well at night and not be worried about having an emergency that you can't pay for? Some people are like, you know what, I'm good with 3. I've met some people who are good with 1, but I usually recommend at least having 3. Some people feel like 6 months isn't enough. And if that's you, I would also recommend you think about the opportunity cost of having too much in cash. Like we just talked about before, $1 not invested, you're not getting compounding interest, you're not able to grow your tree. After you've hit these 3 buckets, going back to the 401k. So you're already investing to the match. Now you can max it out. So the maximum amount you can contribute to your 401k in any given year as an employee is $20,500. Anyone who's over the age of 50 can contribute up to $27,000. After you've maxed that out, you can start looking at a Roth IRA. So this is another retirement account vehicle. It's after tax. The way it works is you put your money in after tax, and then it grows tax-free. And then as long as you take the money out after you're age 59 and a half, and the account has been open for at least 5 years, you don't pay any tax at that time. So it's really one of the best investment vehicles that the government gives us. And then after you have finished all of these places, the last place to go is a non-retirement brokerage account. And I usually recommend, once you are at this top tier, it makes sense to do some deeper financial planning. So if you get to this top place, you've clearly done a great job by yourself managing your investments, but it's usually worth it at that point to talk to someone for some individual coaching or create a more cohesive financial plan. I also want to say all these places here are for your long-term savings goals, like retirement. This is not where to put savings for a house or a car. If one of your goals is to buy a house in, the next 2 or 3 years, that is one time where it's okay to keep the money in cash, because the last thing you want is to invest all of your new house money in the stock market and it goes down, and now you need money for your house and $15,000 or $20,000 is gone. So when you're saving for a short-term goal, that is the one time it's okay to put your money in a high yield savings account and keep it safe so that you have it for your goal when you need it. These are all long-term investment vehicles. All right. So now we're going to go through a checklist from this meeting. All right. So the first thing you want to do is schedule a time every week or month to look at your money stuff. And I often find it's really helpful to do this while also doing something I like. So maybe that's sitting on your front porch or your closed-in front porch if you also live somewhere cold that is winter, with your coffee and your cat or your dog. Maybe it's at night with a glass of wine when you're relaxing and maybe have the office on in the background. But I have found it's really helpful to link this time to something that I enjoy doing, so that I look forward to it instead of feeling overwhelmed and dreading it. Then you want to set your short-term and long-term financial goals. I often think about a 3-month, a 3-year, and a 30-year plan for my goals. And that framework helps me a lot. And then you want to create a budget that aligns with those goals. And when you're creating this budget, I think it's really is helpful to use either Mint, Excel, or a piece of paper and pencil to create it so that you can easily see where your money is and where it's going. Right? And then we want to get rid of that high interest rate debt. Automate your savings wherever it's possible. Build an emergency fund in a high yield savings account. For those of you who don't know what a high yield savings account is, the name is a little misleading because high yield right now is like 0.4, 0.5%. Interest rates are rather low, and these types of accounts aren't offered through like the big banks like Chase or Bank of America. They're offered through smaller places. So like I have mine at American Express, Ally Bank offers one, Discover offers one. And these aren't accounts that are going to help you get rich, but everybody needs an emergency savings. 0.4% isn't a lot, but it's not zero. On mine, I usually get like $200 a year. Again, not a ton, but it's $200 that I didn't have at the beginning of the year. So one way to think about it, if you Google high yield savings account, a lot of them will come up. It's also fine if you already have an American Express credit card or Discover card, just open it at that institution. This way you don't have to create a second login. They're all really basically the same. Right, and then we're going to maximize tax efficient savings, so the 401k and the Roth IRA that we talked about. And then this next bullet, so organizing your investments and determining asset allocation. We didn't get into this today. That will be a topic for next week. We'll talk about figuring out what your asset allocation should be. Same with life insurance and disability. We're going to talk about those things next week as well. And then estate planning, we will also get into next week. Some of these last three are maybe things you haven't thought about before, especially estate planning with younger people. No one really thinks about that, but it is worth doing a little bit of work there now. All right, so some of you are looking at this and thinking I got this, which is great. Some of you might be looking at this and being like, I already do a ton of this, and that's awesome. Some of you might be thinking exactly the opposite, or kind of feel uncertain of what to do or where to start, and that's okay, or maybe you're in between. I am happy to answer any questions you have or schedule a brief meeting to help get you started. I will also say most financial firms won't work with you until you have at least a few $100,000 that they're able to manage. We have a model where we're able to offer financial coaching and do work with you now while you're still building wealth. If that's something that anyone's interested in, I'm happy to answer more questions about that. My cell phone number and my email are on the screen. I am going to hang out on this Zoom for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions they want to ask now, you can feel free to take yourself off of mute or DM me or direct message me if you like, whatever you prefer. But thank you all so much for coming. I look forward to doing this again next week, where we're going to get into investments, insurance, and estate. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
Hi, Sarah. I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting this. This is really helpful, and I'm glad that's continuing. I had a question about no interest, like payment options. I've been seeing them a lot lately with Prime. You know, when you spend over a certain amount, you can pay monthly for 6 months, 12 months. I've seen Klarna, and I even saw one for Google financing. So these seem like good options because it gives you a little more time to pay off a larger expense, and spreads it out over time. So instead of me spending like $1,000 a month on one thing, and then 500 on my credits, 1,000 one month, it's 500 the next month, I balance out over time. Is there any downside to utilizing those kind of credit? Because we try to pay off our credit card every month, because of in order to avoid the interest. So I'm wondering if there's any downside of these kind of interest-free options.
So I'm not personally familiar with exactly what you're mentioning. Is this something you're talking about using for like a bigger purchase that you don't want to put on a credit card because it would accrue?
Or sorry, no, like I have a Prime credit card, for example, and now on Amazon, you can, when you spend over a certain amount, like say you do like a $300 expense, like, oh, you can pay this off over 6 months for 0% interest using your Prime card. And I've seen a few other similar options like this. I've used them before for a few high purchase options, but with Prime, it's like you're spending money on Amazon all the time. So
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, sorry. I think I have a better understanding. I understand what you're asking now. I don't think there's a downside. I mean, it's zero interest. It's not costing you anything.
Right.
And being able to finance it, like, instead, you have like the money now that you could do something else with. I don't think there's a downside, as long as, you know, obviously you pay everything off on time and you don't get to a point where you're not able to pay it and interest would start accruing. I don't think there's a downside.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've been seeing them a lot lately, and it's like, I wonder if there's like some, why are they why like what are they getting out of it?
Yeah, so what they're probably getting out of it is that enough people won't pay it off on time that they'll be able to start charging them interest. Like, that's the bet the actuaries at Amazon or have figured out, that why it's worth it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you.
The other thing that I heard about the interest-free payment options is just that they also get you in the habit of spending money over time, or making that kind of purchase, or maybe buying things that you can't necessarily afford at the moment. So it may get you into the habit of spending beyond your means, and then you transition into like putting more money on your credit card, something like that. So the thing I was cautioned against is just forming habits that are unsustainable.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So it's really important that if you do go that route, that you add that to your budget for the next few months or for however long it's going to take to pay it off. And if you find yourself constantly using it because you can't afford to buy something right now, it might be worth taking a step back and reevaluating your goals and your cash flow before you keep using that option.
Awesome, great points. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time to give this webinar. It was really helpful. My question was around, one of the notes that you made was that we should expect to see on average a 7% return on our savings, but then a high interest or a high yield savings account would be more closer to 0.5%. So how can we invest so that, how can we get the how can we achieve the 7% return for our investments?
Great question. So that the 7% was, I needed to use an interest rate example for the model. And so 7% is a reasonable long-term rate of return to expect when you invest your money in different markets and different sectors. So this would not be putting your money in like a cash savings account. This is actually investing your money. And this is something I'm going to go through in more detail next week, but we'll talk about like different markets around the world and investing your money. So it's not in cash. You have it in like some large cap US companies or large cap US funds, international funds, emerging markets. And all those holistically together, when they're invested over a long term, like 30 years, you can reasonably expect to get between 6-7% over that time horizon. Does that make more sense?
I see. So that would only really be applicable for long-term savings, not for short-term savings. Is that fair?
Yes. And so, because short-term savings, it's really hard to tell, especially when you invest your money aggressively. Like, you might be down 10% one year and then up 20% the next. It's really impossible to know what your investments will do in the short term.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Just a quick question over just credit card usage and that kind of thing, because there was like not a whole lot of talk just about, I guess my question would be, would it be useful to have multiple credit cards? Or, I mean, obviously you don't want to have too many so that you obviously aren't paying them off each month and that kind of thing. But where do you think you would draw the line as like a minimum maximum number on how many to have, and or how much to spend on each in terms of percentage?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I don't know that I have like, you should have this many credit cards as a minimum or this much as a maximum. What I would think about is, what if you're going to have a credit card that you're going to pay off every month and you want to use points for rewards, think about what you want to use your points for. So for example, if you're like, I travel a lot, I fly a lot, I want to get free flights, it might be worth getting a credit card at the airline you use, because you're going to get points faster and you're going to be able to redeem it for more miles. If you're like, you know what, I drive all the time for my job, I work in sales, you know, I heard of you're a star salesman, that triangle. You're like, I want to use this for gas. Finding a credit card that will give you the most reward points for spending money on gas, that's like a good option. And I think NerdWallet is really a good resource to use. Like if you type in NerdWallet credit cards, and I'm happy to send this link out as well because I can't remember exactly what I Googled to find it. You can take a quiz and answer those questions and it will recommend the best credit card for you. So I used it for myself and I recommended it to other people. I find it to be really helpful. I also think if there's a store you buy a lot of stuff from, like I have the Sephora credit card that I pay off, but I get a lot of rewards. I like makeup and hair stuff, so it's been very beneficial for me. But that's what I would think about. I don't know that there's necessarily a minimum or maximum that's right. The only other thing I would caution is that if you do decide to close a credit card at any point, like your credit score will take a hit. So when you pay off a card, if you're like at that point trying to purchase a house or even get an auto loan, I wouldn't close the card yet because your credit score will go down.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. And I guess just a really small follow-up question. Is there any downside to not using any credit card that you might have open or something like that? If you have like a couple too many or something like that, obviously closing you don't want to, but is there any like downside in not using them just in general?
I would see if you're being like, so some cards have an annual fee. So you might keep like, I know like I have the Chase Sapphire card and that's like $100 a year. So you might want to just close it to get rid of it and take the credit hit for a little while, but that would be a downside. And then Steve also mentioned in the comments, like you don't want to keep opening cards because they do look at your credit score every time you open a new one. So constantly doing it isn't a great idea, but having 2 or 3 is probably okay. Okay, any other questions? Oh, sorry, Steve direct messaged me that. I thought he just sent it in like an open chat. Steve also works here. He's great. Okay, well, if that's it, like, please feel free to hop off. And again, like you can text me or email me if anybody has any questions they didn't want to share here. But I look forward to talking to you all next week. Have a nice night. Talk to you then.